Homeless black boy asked millionaire disabled daughter to dance, and a true miracle happened. It was a sunny afternoon in the middle of a busy city park. People were hustling around, some jogging, others relaxing on benches, and children playing games in the wide open spaces. Among the crowd, one figure stood out, a young boy named Jalen. He was sitting quietly on a bench, his tattered clothes barely protecting him from the chill in the air. His shoes, worn and filled with holes, had clearly seen better days. But there was something about Jalen's eyes. There was a spark in them, a fire that showed his resilience and hope, even if the world around him had little to offer. Jalen, a boy of around 12, had been living on the streets for months. His story wasn't unique in a city like this, where millions of people lived in the shadows of towering buildings. His life was one of survival, getting by day, finding shelter under bridges or in empty buildings, and sometimes begging for food. Yet Jalen was not a beggar in spirit. Despite his circumstances, he held his head high, trying to live with the dignity that he knew he deserved, even though the world often saw him as invisible. That day, however, something different caught his attention. Across the park, there was a family that stood out from the rest. They weren't just any family. This family looked different. They had the wealth that many people in the park could only dream of, and their clothes were clean, crisp, and new. The man, dressed in an expensive suit, was pushing a wheelchair. In it sat a young girl who looked to be about the same age as Jalen. Her long brown hair was neatly done, and her eyes sparkled with intelligence, but there was something different about her. Jalen noticed her wheelchair right away, and a sadness in her eyes that seemed to reflect his own. The girl, whose name was Leela, had been born with a condition that made it difficult for her to walk. Despite her family's wealth and status, Leela had never experienced the freedom many other kids took for granted. She was often confined to the wheelchair, a reality that made her feel isolated. It wasn't the physical limitations that bothered her most, but the emotional ones, the feeling of being different, excluded, and not fully seen by the world around her. Leela was sitting there with her family, staring off into the distance. The breeze played with her hair, but she didn't seem to notice. Her parents were talking to each other, but Leela's eyes were distant, lost in thoughts that no one could reach. To those who didn't know her, she appeared fine, like any other child in the park. But Jalen, with his own experiences of feeling invisible, saw her differently. He recognized that look in her eyes, the look of someone who was in need of something more than just material wealth. She was searching for connection, for something real. Jalen had always been good at observing people. He learned early on to read the small details that gave away a person's true feelings. That's why, when he saw Leela sitting there, he felt compelled to do something. He wasn't sure what, but he knew he couldn't just walk away and let her sit there, alone in her thoughts. He stood up, brushing the dirt off his pants, and walked over to her. His steps were hesitant at first. He wasn't used to approaching people from different walks of life. People like Leela and her family often ignored him, or worse, acted as though he didn't exist. But something about today felt different. Leela's parents were too caught up in their own conversation to notice him, so Jalen approached Leela directly. He stood in front of her, not sure what to say, but feeling that he had to say something. His voice was soft but clear as he spoke. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. The question hung in the air for a moment, and Leela blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected such a thing, especially from a boy like him. She had been used to people feeling pity for her, avoiding her because she was in a wheelchair. She never thought anyone would ask her to dance, especially not someone from a different world than hers. Her first instinct was to say no. She didn't think it was possible. She couldn't even walk, let alone dance. But there was something in Jalen's eyes, something in the way he was standing there, that made her pause. She could see the sincerity in his face, the genuine kindness he was offering. He wasn't looking at her like others did, with pity or fear. He was looking at her as though she were just like anyone else. That made her heart stir. Before she could respond, her father turned and noticed the interaction. He frowned slightly, not sure what was happening. Leela's mother, sensing the awkwardness, was about to say something when Leela herself spoke up. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Leela's father raised an eyebrow, surprised by her response. He was about to ask her why she had agreed, but he saw the look in her eyes, the same look he had seen years ago when she was younger, the spark that reminded him of how full of life she once was before her condition took hold of her. With a smile, Leela's father nodded to Jalen, signaling that it was okay. At that moment, Jalen began to dance. But it wasn't the kind of dance that most people would expect. Jalen's dance was not about intricate moves or perfect rhythm. It was a free expression of movement, a flow of energy, his body shifting and turning in ways that seemed to speak of joy and freedom. It wasn't about looking good. It was about being present, about showing Leela that she didn't have to be defined by her wheelchair. As he danced, Jalen moved around her wheelchair, spinning and twirling, his feet tapping lightly on the ground. The music from a nearby street performer played in the background, setting the pace for the dance. The rhythm filled the air, and despite everything that Leela had gone through, despite the years of frustration and feeling left out, she couldn't help but smile. She had never seen anyone so carefree, so full of life. She had always longed to feel that way, to be free in her own skin, and now, for a brief moment, it felt as though she was. Leela's hands began to move, not in a way that was graceful or coordinated, but in a way that felt right to her. Her fingers tapped the edges of her wheelchair, moving to the beat of the music. Jalen noticed this and slowed his movements to match hers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. He was not trying to impress her with fancy moves. Instead, he was letting her take part in the dance, even if it was in her own way. The people around them began to notice. Some smiled, some watched in disbelief, and a few even clapped along with the rhythm of the music. The air, once filled with the humdrum of city life, was now alive with the sound of joy. For the first time in a long while, Leela felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. She was not just the girl in the wheelchair. She was a person, someone worthy of being included, of sharing in the simple joy of dance. When the music stopped, Jalen took a step back, breathing heavily, his face flushed from the effort. Leela sat there, stunned but filled with an overwhelming sense of happiness. She had never expected such a moment, not in her wildest dreams. The crowd around them had dispersed, but the memory of what just happened would stay with her forever. It wasn't just the dance that had changed her that day. It was the realization that someone saw her as more than just her disability, that someone cared enough to share a moment of joy with her. And for Jalen, the homeless boy who had once been invisible to most people, the act of reaching out, of offering kindness, had made all the difference. The park was filled with a sense of stillness after the dance, like the air itself had paused to hold onto the magic of the moment. People slowly returned to their activities, but the memories of what had just happened lingered, quietly stirring something in everyone who had witnessed the scene. It was a rare moment of human connection, and it had been shared between two strangers from completely different worlds, one homeless, the other wealthy, yet both longing for something more. Leela sat in her wheelchair, her hands still lightly tapping on the armrests, as if the rhythm of the music was still flowing through her. She looked at Jalen, who had stopped dancing but was still smiling, his breath coming in quick, short bursts. There was a soft glow about him, a quiet pride in his eyes, as if he had done something far more significant than just dance. He had reached her in a way that no one ever had before. Her father, Mr. Harrison, was watching the exchange with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He had always been protective of Leela, ever since she was a baby. Her disability had made him overbearing at times, always ensuring that she was safe and taken care of, often keeping her away from the rougher parts of the city. He'd never been one to approach people like Jalen, the ones who lived in the shadows of society. Yet, something in Jalen's honesty and the kindness he had shown to his daughter made him reconsider everything he thought he knew about people like him. Leela's mother, sitting quietly nearby, turned her attention to her husband, her eyes soft with concern. "Do you think she's okay?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with a hint of worry. "I think she's more than okay, Mr. Harrison replied, his gaze still fixed on the scene before him. "I've never seen her smile like that. Maybe she just needed something real, something that wasn't wrapped in a ribbon of luxury or care. Maybe she needed to feel normal." Leela had always been used to receiving special treatment, people being overly cautious around her, offering her assistance in a way that made her feel separate from everyone else. She had never truly been part of the world outside of her own, and though her family's wealth provided her with anything she could ever need, it never filled the empty space inside her heart. It was a space that only genuine human connection could touch, and for the first time she felt like she had found it in Jalen, a boy who had nothing but a will to make her feel seen. As Leela sat there, lost in her thoughts, Jalen noticed her gaze. His smile faltered for a moment. He hadn't expected her to react like this so deeply. He thought it would just be a small act, a way to bring a little light into her day. But now, looking at her, he realized that something bigger had happened. Maybe it wasn't just about the dance. Maybe it was about the way he had treated her, like she was no different from anyone else. In his eyes, she wasn't the girl in the wheelchair. She was Leela, and for the first time, it seemed like someone had given her that same recognition. Leela, still feeling the warmth of the moment, turned to her father and whispered, "I want to thank him." Mr. Harrison nodded, understanding the importance of the moment. "You can go over and thank him, sweetheart. He seems like a good kid." With a sense of determination, Leela wheeled herself toward Jalen, who was now standing a little to the side, quietly watching the world pass by again. He seemed lost in thought, as if he was still trying to process the connection they had just shared. Leela's wheelchair rolled smoothly over the paved path, and when she was close enough, she stopped, looking up at Jalen. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice still carrying the sincerity of the dance. "That was the best moment I've had in a long time." Jalen blinked, surprised by the warmth in her words. He wasn't used to being thanked. People often looked at him with pity, offering charity or passing him by without a second thought. But Leela wasn't like the others. She wasn't offering him anything in return. She was simply acknowledging the moment they had shared. "It was nothing," he replied modestly, scratching the back of his head. "I just wanted to help." But Leela, seeing the humility in his actions, shook her head. "No, it was everything. You gave me something I never thought I could have again. You made me feel normal." Her words hit Jalen harder than he expected. He had never thought about it that way. To him, it was just dancing. But for Leela, it was so much more. It was freedom, joy, and a feeling of being seen and heard in a world that often overlooked her. Mr. Harrison, watching the exchange from a distance, felt a strange stirring in his heart. He had always believed in the power of money, of providing for his family in ways that would give them everything they could ever need. But he began to wonder if there was more to life than just giving his daughter the finest things money could buy. Maybe what Leela really needed wasn't more material wealth, but someone who saw her for who she truly was, someone who didn't look at her disability as an obstacle, but as a part of her journey. As the conversation between Leela and Jalen continued, Mr. Harrison found himself walking over, his curiosity piqued. He hadn't expected to be drawn into this moment, but something about it felt important. He knew he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. "Hello, son," Mr. Harrison said, his voice warm but firm as he approached Jalen. "I'm Leela's father, Robert Harrison. I wanted to thank you for what you did for my daughter today." Jalen stood up straighter, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to talking to people like Mr. Harrison, wealthy, successful people who seemed to have it all. But there was no judgment in the man's eyes, only genuine appreciation. "It was nothing, sir," Jalen said, his voice respectful but still carrying the weight of his experiences. "I just wanted to make her smile." Leela's father studied Jalen for a moment, then smiled. "It was more than that. It was a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can change everything." Leela, who had been watching the exchange quietly, added, "I'm really grateful, Jalen. I don't think anyone has ever done something like that for me before." The sincerity in her words touched Jalen deeply. He had always thought that the people in his life were the ones who needed help. But now, in this strange moment, he realized that even the wealthiest people could sometimes feel invisible, just like he had. He hadn't done anything special that day, he had just danced. But to Leela, it had been everything. Mr. Harrison placed a hand on Jalen's shoulder, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Listen, son, I know you're going through some tough times, and I want to help. If there's anything you need, anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. My family has the means to help, and I think you deserve a chance to change your life." Jalen, caught off guard by the offer, shook his head slowly. I don't know what to say. I've never had anyone offer me something like that before." "You don't need to say anything," Mr. Harrison said kindly. "Just know that sometimes people need a little help to get where they're meant to be, and I believe you've got a lot of potential." Jalen was silent for a moment, letting the weight of the offer sink in. He wasn't used to people believing in him, especially not people who had everything he could only dream of. But here, standing before him, was a man who seemed to truly care. And that, for the first time in a long time, made Jalen believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved more than just surviving. Maybe he could start living. Jalen had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to something like this. He had lived his whole life on the streets, never expecting anything more than the next meal or a warm place to sleep. But here he was, being offered help by someone he had just met, someone who didn't look at him with pity but with genuine compassion. It was a foreign concept to Jalen, and he wasn't sure how to process it. The next few days passed in a blur. Jalen went back to his usual routine, scavenging for food, finding a place to sleep, and staying out of the way of the city's fast-paced, indifferent life. But the conversation with Mr. Harrison lingered in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had said, about offering help, about believing in him. Jalen had always been the one who helped others, never the one receiving help. So the idea of someone reaching out to him, offering a chance to change his life, seemed almost too good to be true. But that's when it happened. Just a few days after their meeting, Jalen received a letter. It was a small, plain envelope with his name written on the front in neat handwriting. At first, he thought it was just another piece of junk mail or a bill he couldn't afford. But when he opened it, his eyes widened in disbelief. The letter was from Mr. Harrison. It was short and to the point. Jalen, I hope this letter finds you well. I haven't forgotten our conversation, and I believe you deserve a chance at something better. Please come to my office at the address below. I've arranged something for you. Robert Harrison. Jalen stared at the letter for a long time, his mind racing. He had never been to a place like an office before. The idea of stepping into a building full of people in suits, people who had everything he didn't, filled him with both excitement and fear. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was a chance to do something with his life, something he had never dared to dream of. The next morning, Jalen cleaned himself up as best as he could. He found an old, slightly torn jacket in one of the bins behind a local store, and he made sure his shoes, though worn, were as clean as he could get them. He was nervous, but there was also a part of him that felt hopeful. For the first time in years, he felt like he was taking a step toward something better. When he arrived at the address on the letter, he was surprised by how different the place looked. The building was tall, modern, and gleaming with glass windows. It seemed so far removed from the world Jalen was used to. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The lobby was spacious, with shiny marble floors and comfortable chairs. A receptionist at the front desk looked up when he entered, her eyes briefly scanning him before her expression softened. She didn't ask him for anything, didn't judge him for his appearance. She just smiled and told him to take a seat. Jalen sat nervously, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He couldn't help but feel out of place in this pristine environment. Everything around him was so different from the streets he had known for so long. But as he sat there, waiting for Mr. Harrison, he tried to remind himself that this was his chance. A chance to turn things around, to stop living just to survive and start living to thrive. After a few minutes, a door opened, and Mr. Harrison walked out with a warm smile. He greeted Jalen as if they were old friends, shaking his hand firmly. "Jalen, I'm glad you came," he said. "I hope you're doing well." I'm doing okay," Jalen replied, unsure of what to say. "Thanks for everything." Mr. Harrison motioned for him to follow, leading Jalen into a large, well-lit office. It was comfortable, with soft chairs and a desk made of rich wood. There were bookshelves filled with thick books and papers, and the walls were adorned with paintings and awards. It was a world Jalen had never seen before, but it didn't feel as intimidating as he had expected. "Have a seat," Mr. Harrison said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Jalen sat down, his hands still a little shaky. What is it?" he asked, his voice tinged with nervous curiosity. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression kind but serious. "I know you've had a tough life, Jalen, I can see that, and I know it's not easy to ask for help, but I also know that you have potential. More than you realize, that's why I wanted to offer you something." Jalen's heart began to race. Was this really happening? Was someone really offering him a chance to change his life? "I've arranged for you to stay in a small apartment for now," Mr. Harrison continued. "It's not much, but it's a start. I've also set up a scholarship for you at a local school. You'll have access to all the resources you need, books, tutoring, everything you need to succeed." Jalen couldn't believe what he was hearing. A scholarship, an apartment. These were things he had only ever dreamed of, things he thought were out of his reach. And yet here they were, offered to him with no strings attached. The idea of going to school, of actually learning and making something of himself, felt like a distant fantasy that was now suddenly within reach. "But why?" Jalen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this for me? I'm just some kid from the streets." "I don't deserve any of this." Mr. Harrison's eyes softened. "You do deserve it, Jalen. No one should have to live the way you've lived. Everyone deserves a chance to make something of themselves. I believe in you. I think you can do amazing things if you're given the right opportunity." Jalen's heart swelled with emotion, but he didn't know how to express it. His life had never been about chances or opportunities. It had always been about getting by, about surviving another day. And now, for the first time, someone was offering him a real opportunity to thrive. "Thank you," Jalen said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I don't know what to say. I've never had anyone believe in me like this." "You don't need to say anything, mister." Harrison replied with a smile. "Just take this chance. Make the most of it. I know you will." For the first time in his life, Jalen felt like he had a future. It wasn't just about getting by anymore. It was about growing, learning, and becoming something more than he had ever imagined. It was a chance to build a life, not just survive it. As he left Mr. Harrison's office, Jalen couldn't stop smiling. His feet barely touched the ground as he walked out of the building. The weight of his past was still there, but now there was something new, a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. For the first time, he felt like he was on the path to something better. And he wasn't going to let that chance slip away. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind for Jalen. His life, which had once been filled with uncertainty and struggle, had transformed in a way he never thought possible. The small apartment Mr. Harrison had arranged for him was a world apart from the streets. It was simple, but it was his own space, with a bed that didn't have to be shared with the cold pavement or the harsh elements outside. The room was cozy, with a small desk where he could sit and do his schoolwork, and a window that looked out onto the bustling city below. For the first time in his life, Jalen felt a sense of stability, even if it was new and unfamiliar. The school was another challenge altogether. At first, Jalen had been terrified. He had never attended a real school, and the idea of sitting in a classroom with other students who had grown up with every advantage, was intimidating. He had never been good with books or formal education. The streets had taught him how to survive, not how to read, write, or solve math problems. But when Mr. Harrison spoke to him about the scholarship, he had encouraged him to take things one step at a time, to not be overwhelmed by the process. The first few days were rough. Jalen struggled to keep up with the lessons, his mind racing with thoughts of all the things he didn't know. But something inside him pushed him to keep going. He wasn't the type to give up easily, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. He remembered how he had danced with Leela in the park, how she had smiled for the first time in ages because someone had made her feel seen. He realized that he wanted to do the same for himself. He wanted to make a life for himself, one that was not defined by his past, by his circumstances, or by the harshness of the world that had always seemed to overlook him. With each passing day, Jalen worked harder. He spent hours after school in the small apartment, reading books he had never thought to pick up before, solving math problems, and practicing his writing. He was determined to prove to himself that he was capable of more than just surviving. He was determined to prove that he could thrive. His teachers noticed the effort he was putting in. At first, they had been skeptical, unsure if he would be able to catch up with the other students. But as the weeks went by, they saw a spark in him, a willingness to learn, to improve, and to succeed. Jalen's grades slowly began to improve, and with that, his confidence grew. He wasn't just surviving in school anymore, he was starting to excel. One afternoon, as he was sitting at his desk working on an assignment, there was a knock on the door. Jalen opened it to find Mr. Harrison standing there, a smile on his face. "I thought I'd check in on you," Mr. Harrison said, stepping inside. "How's everything going?" Jalen smiled, his face lighting up. "It's going better than I expected, honestly. It's hard work, but I think I'm starting to get the hang of it." "That's great to hear," Mr. Harrison replied, sitting down at the small table in the corner. "I've been hearing good things from your teachers. You're showing a lot of promise." Jalen felt a wave of pride wash over him. It was the first time anyone had ever praised him for his work in school. He had always been the kid that people overlooked, the one who wasn't expected to amount to much. But now it seemed like people were starting to see him differently. They were starting to believe in him. "I'm just trying to keep up," Jalen said, his voice filled with humility. "I've never been good at school, but I'm learning." "You're doing more than just learning," Mr. Harrison said with a knowing smile. "You're proving to yourself that you can do anything. You just needed the right opportunity." Jalen nodded, feeling the weight of Mr. Harrison's words. It wasn't just about getting through school or surviving anymore. It was about showing himself that he was capable, that he could overcome any obstacle, no matter how big. And it wasn't just about school. It was about life, about building a future for himself that was filled with possibility and hope. As the months went by, Jalen's progress continued to impress everyone around him. He joined after-school programs, made friends with some of the other students, and began to feel like he truly belonged. His past, the streets, and the hardships he had faced seemed more distant now, like they were part of another life, one that he had left behind. It wasn't that he had forgotten about it, but it no longer defined him. He had a new story now, a story of hard work, of second chances, and of the belief that anything was possible if you were willing to put in the effort. But even as things were improving, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the world outside was still, Jalen would sometimes wonder if he was just dreaming. Was he really capable of succeeding? Was he really worthy of all the help and support he had received? And what if he failed? What if, despite all his efforts, he wasn't able to turn his life around? It was during one of these moments of doubt that he received another letter from Mr. Harrison. This time, the letter wasn't just a note of encouragement. It was an offer for something more. It was a scholarship for a prestigious summer program that would allow Jalen to further his education and get even more hands-on experience. The letter was full of hope and possibilities, and as Jalen read it, he felt a surge of excitement and fear all at once. This was a big opportunity, one that could change everything for him. The thought of leaving the comfort of his small apartment, of stepping into a world that was even bigger than he had ever imagined, was both thrilling and terrifying. But then he thought of Leela, the girl he had danced with in the park, the girl who had shown him that sometimes, just a small act of kindness could change everything. He thought of how far he had come, how much he had already achieved, and he realized that he couldn't let fear hold him back. So he accepted the scholarship. As the summer program began, Jalen was nervous but excited. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this chance slip away. He wasn't going to let his past define him anymore. He was going to build a future, and he was going to do it with everything he had. Each day of the program brought new challenges, but also new lessons. Jalen made connections with people from all walks of life, people who were passionate about learning and growing. He found that he had more in common with them than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just a kid from the streets anymore. He was a student, a learner, someone who had something to offer. As the program came to an end, Jalen felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had learned so much, not just about academics, but about himself. He had proven to himself that he could adapt, that he could thrive, and that he was capable of more than he had ever given himself credit for. But the most important lesson was this. It wasn't just about the opportunities that others gave him. It was about the belief he had in himself, the drive to keep going no matter the obstacles. Jalen had come a long way from the boy who had once danced with Leela in the park. And as he looked back on his journey, he knew that this was just the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead, but now he was ready to face them head-on, with the confidence that he could overcome anything that came his way. The day had finally come for Jalen to return to the park. The same park where everything had changed for him. The day he had met Leela, the day he had danced with her and in the process found his life taking an unexpected turn. He had come so far since then, far beyond what he had ever thought possible. He was no longer the homeless boy who had wandered the streets looking for scraps of food or shelter. Now, he was someone with a future, someone with purpose, and the possibility of a life that held more than just survival. As he stood outside the familiar gates of the park, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions. There was a sense of nostalgia, of course, but also a feeling of gratitude. He was no longer defined by his past. He was standing on the threshold of something much bigger, something filled with hope and opportunity. He had built a new life for himself, one that was the result of hard work, the kindness of strangers, and his own belief that he could make a difference in his life. But there was one thing, one person, he had yet to truly reconnect with Leela. Jalen hadn't seen her since that fateful day in the park. Their worlds had been so different, so far apart, but that one moment they had shared had been powerful. It had brought them together in a way that nothing else could. He had been thinking about her a lot lately, especially after his life had started to change. He wanted to tell her how much that moment had meant to him, how much she had inspired him to believe in himself, to keep going when things felt impossible. Walking slowly through the park, Jalen took in the sights and sounds around him. The same musicians played their instruments in the corner, the children still ran across the grass, and the sun was shining brightly above. It felt like everything had stayed the same, yet Jalen knew it wasn't true. Everything had changed. He had changed. He walked toward the area where he and Leela had first met. His heart began to race as he approached the familiar bench, the place where it all started. And then, as if by some twist of fate, he saw her. Leela was there, sitting in her wheelchair with her caregiver beside her. She was looking out at the people around her, lost in thought just as she had been that day. But this time there was something different about her. She looked more at peace, more confident, as though she, too, had undergone some transformation. Leela's caregiver noticed Jalen first and nudged Leela gently. Leela turned her head, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Her eyes widened with recognition, and then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was the same smile that had lit up her face the day he danced with her, but now it seemed even brighter, more genuine. "Jalen," Leela said, her voice filled with surprise and warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here." Jalen smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. "I didn't think I'd be back either," he replied, his voice a little shaky with emotion. "But I've been thinking about you, about that day. It changed everything for me." Leela's smile softened. "It changed everything for me too," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I never thought anyone would see me like you did, like I was, normal." "You are normal, Leela," Jalen said, his eyes meeting hers. "You're more than that. You're strong, and you inspire people in ways you don't even realize." Leela looked down for a moment, her fingers brushing the wheels of her chair, then back up at Jalen. "You've changed too," she said. "I can see it. You're not the same boy who danced with me that day. You're different, I can tell." Jalen nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I've been working hard. School, my life, everything's different now. I'm not living on the streets anymore. I have a chance. And it's all because of that dance, because of you." Leela looked at him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "I'm glad I could help, but you did all the work, Jalen. You took the chance. You didn't give up." "I didn't give up because of you," Jalen replied, his voice sincere. "You made me believe in myself when I didn't think I could. You showed me that there's more to life than just surviving." Leela reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm. "I'm proud of you, Jalen," she said softly. "I'm really proud of you." Jalen felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at her. He had never thought of himself as someone to be proud of. But in that moment, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had become someone worthy of that pride, not just in the eyes of others, but in his own eyes. The two of them sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing, about life, about dreams, and about how far they had come since that day. They both shared stories of their experiences, their struggles, and the things that had shaped them. For the first time in a long time, they felt truly connected, not by pity or circumstance, but by a genuine bond that had formed from shared moments of kindness, vulnerability, and hope. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the park, Jalen stood up. He felt lighter, freer than he had ever felt before. "I should go," he said, his voice filled with a quiet sense of contentment. "But I'm glad I came back. I'm glad I got to see you again." Leela smiled, her eyes sparkling with emotion. "I'm glad, too," she said. "And I'm always here, Jalen. Whenever you need me, I'll be here." Jalen nodded, a soft smile spreading across his face. "Thanks, Leela. You've been more of a friend to me than I could ever have imagined." With that, Jalen turned and walked away, but this time he didn't feel lost or uncertain. He felt like he was walking towards something brighter, something full of possibilities. He had come so far from the boy who had once sat on a park bench, invisible to the world around him. And now he was someone who could look back and see how much he had grown, how much he had accomplished. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a person with a future. As he walked away, he knew that the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But now he had the strength, the determination, and the belief in himself to face whatever came next. And he knew that, no matter where life took him, The lessons he had learned from Leela, from Mr. Harrison, and from his own journey would stay with him forever. He had been given a chance, a true miracle, and he wasn't going to waste it.